Okay. Hello, everybody. Again, we're now going to jump into our data governance panel. Um, Data governance and MDM kind of go hand in hand. Are they the chicken or the egg? Which one is the chicken? Which one is the egg? Which one goes first? Is a topic of hot debate, and that's something that we're going to get into a little bit here. Sometimes MDM is viewed as a subcategory of governance, sometimes not. But what we've got here is a panel of experts, and we're going to explore that conversation. So I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves one by one, then we'll jump into some topics. First, Andrea, why don't you say hello again, since you were on the we just
That's right.
your customer video a little while ago.
Well, here I am live. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Waring. I am the Director of Data Strategy and Governance at Apogee Enterprises out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I lead a group of talented individuals that are focusing on data governance, MDM, and I just acquired the analytics business-facing team as well. So super excited to be here.
Excellent. Celeste, why don't you introduce yourself? And obviously, Celeste is a part of Nestle Purina, which Brian Zenk gave the keynote earlier on in the session. So Celeste, let's hear from you.
Hi, my name is Celeste Sauer, and I'm the product owner of the Data Governance Swarm at Nestle Purina. I'm part of our digital transformation for data and analytics, and I work in an organization known as the Hive that you heard from our fearless leader earlier, Brian Zink.
Fantastic. And Sean, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and where you come from, what you do?
All right, thanks, Martin. My name is Sean Sangster. I'm the Director of Data Governance and Management for the Ministry of Health in the province of Nova Scotia in Canada. So I'm up on the East Coast of Canada here. So my team is responsible for data governance for theoretically the whole health system, predominantly within the ministry. We also have a data services team that's a little more customer facing, and then I've got a data engineering team that operates our data warehouse.
Fantastic. All right. So, like I said before, three experts to help us kind of jump into this conversation. So let's first of all tackle the question of chicken or egg. What is the relationship between MDM and governance from your perspective in your organization? What do you think is the most helpful way to think about the topics? We'll start with Andrea, and then we'll walk through everybody. But feel free to jump in, each one of you. Andrea, how do you feel?
All right. Put me on this. I will start. I will go first here. In our team, as we think about governance and MDM, I'm a firm believer that we have to understand what the business rules are around the data and who the owner is of that data and who has decision rights over that data, and making sure that we have those concepts documented and understood before we proceed. And in my definition, that's governance. So to me, governance isn't about policies. It's not about having the standards posted to your website and how it should be done, et cetera. It's more about the concept of framework, defining ownership, defining what's good, what's bad, and then executing that and demonstrating the value of that through MDM. So MDM to me is operationalizing that and putting that in place so that you see the end results and you're driving good data through the decision-making, the ownership, et cetera. So that's how we looked at it. We tackled it with defining what those roles and accountabilities are and the business rules and how that applies. And then we executed it through MDM, which drove and demonstrated the value.
Okay, excellent. So an operating framework. So Sean, let's have you talk about this. And given that you're a healthcare organization and healthcare in Canada is more of a public service, maybe your view on governance is a little bit different. How do you feel about governance related to your job?
It's fresh. We've got some parts of my world that are very well governed, but that's largely because there's contractual mechanisms in place where we share data with some federal bodies, and so those need to be really up to snuff. So there's a lot of governance around that very slim subset. But you're absolutely right, Martin. The way healthcare works in Canada, where it is publicly funded, it means that we're a little opportunistic in terms of the systems and data that we create. And so we don't necessarily have or historically have had that forethought around making sure we've got that governance in place to have that, clear ownership, custodianship of data to make sure we've got those standards. So for us, we've done a little bit of governance, and then we get into the world of MDM as we're building out a data analytics platform, and then that is teaching us all of the areas that we kind of intrinsically knew weren't well governed, and quantifying it so we can go back and then start working on governing that. So I'm viewing it as a little bit of one, a little bit of the other, and then some feedback to keep growing.
So kind of an iterative step back and forth between the two different
Exactly.
environments. Interesting. Okay, Celeste, I remember the first time you and I spoke about this a little while back, you said something that I thought was very meaningful about the interaction between governance and MDM in your world. So can you unpack that and tell us a little bit about how that works for you?
Yeah, so our experience was that we walked down the path of thinking that, hey, we need to define this awesome data governance operating model and all of these roles and responsibilities. And when we got to the end, and we had two different internal teams, one that worked mainly with external data and one that worked with internal data. And we had a hard time with the execution. So we walked down the path of identifying issues and opportunities with these teams from two different organizations, but we couldn't get the traction. And we quickly realized that the opportunities and the issues that they were presenting to us, that we really needed technologies to add value for our stakeholders and make data governance stick. And I think that's the term I used with you, Martin, in the past. So with MDM, with the implementation of MDM, stakeholder engagement was immediate. And we also began to see that the stakeholders started to self-identify into those roles that we had already defined in the operating model. And so at that point, we started getting that feedback loop. So we were improving our model at the same time that, that MDM was maturing. So that's our story. I think the right answer is probably they happen at the same time. They certainly complement each other, but that's what worked for us.
Excellent. Yeah, no, and like I said, when you first said that to me a while back, that really stuck with me, and I've used that in conversation with a lot of teams, like briefing Microsoft teams and whatsoever, and the notion that you need to do some level of governance at a framework level first, but when you do MDM is when it starts actually impacting the data and making a difference, and that's where you really get traction. I've had a lot of people really respond to that and say, yeah, that's kind of how it was with us too. So excellent. So let's talk a little bit about the scope of governance in your organization. There's, I think, two broad topics within the idea of governance. There's data access and security, which is certainly data governance. And then there's the part that is more closely intertwined with MDM, which is the data compliance, the correctness and usability of the data foundation. So let's all just talk a little bit about what does that mean to you and your organization when you talk about governance, and how do you measure governance and its impact on the organization? So Sean, let's have you start this one if you don't mind, and just
not at all.
How does this work from the rest of the organization's perspective?
So great question. So for us, we deal with personal information and personal health information. We've got many pieces of legislation that overarch all of those things. And so for us, historically, it's been all about protecting that data. We collect it, we use it for service delivery, and then we lock it away for the whatever time period we keep it for, and we don't touch it. And it's only been recently that we're starting to realize, hey, we can get immense value and drive things. So we're starting to move away from that security and access view of governance and into the conformance and correctness. Because as I kind of hinted at earlier, we've got all these mismatch of systems. There's no conformance, there's no correctness of data, and so it becomes really challenging as we try to link to really understand and drive that value. We're now starting to get into that world where we're trying to inject more of that conformance. So we're at the moment, we're working on cleaning the data before we present it to analysts. I would love to get to a point where it's clean on entry because we've got some kind of a rigor around it. Something as simple as your address. Right now, it's free text fields. We aren't using that the address complete functionality that you would see from UPS or Amazon. And in terms of how do we measure governance, we don't. And it makes me think of that quote: "You can't manage what you don't measure." And so, as the director of data governance, it kind of keeps me up at night that I don't have a metric around that.
Okay, well, maybe by the end of the session, you'll figure out some metrics.
That's why I'm here. I'm taking notes.
So, Celeste, let's exactly. We're all here to learn. Absolutely. So, Celeste, I don't know. We maybe talked about this, but your responsibilities as working in data governance. Do you get into security and access, and how do you view the success of governance, or how do you measure the success of governance across the organization?
Definitely. So, my response to that, as far as like security and access, as well as the conformance and correctness of data, are both in scope. However, first and foremost, security. So making sure that we understand the data that's coming into our space, that the Hive manages, for our business and our stakeholders. And then making sure that we have the right size security for general accessibility, that we're complying with, government regulations, as well as internal compliance. And then making sure that we're that the data usage restrictions, that we're connecting with our data guardian, we understand the data, we understand any usage restrictions, and that we've classified that data so that we're communicating to those that get access to the data, how they have to treat the data. I think the conformance and the correctness of the data comes whenever we make the data accessible. So it's findable, it's accessible, and analysts begin to work with that data. And then that's where our expectations of stewardship jump in, where they help improve the correctness of that data. So
Okay.
it's that feedback loop again. That's the way that we're treating it. I don't think there's a right or wrong way, but that's what fits into our organization.
Do you have a way of measuring the completeness and correctness of data? I mean, there's data profiling, there's all kinds of different things you might be doing, but how do you know whether governance is working in your organization?
I'm gonna. So from our perspective, I don't have anything. It's one of my biggest fails is that we're working through well, what are the KPIs that we should be putting around this? And honestly, because we have multiple swarms, and those swarms I'm an enabling swarm, but we have swarms that are business facing. And so we're enabling those business facing swarms to deliver a product, a master domain. And so I would rely on those business facing swarms, those product owners, to measure, satisfaction, um, just, time spent on, or time reduced for. I think that's where I measure, as far as how much time are stakeholders spending on something, and then once we implement data governance, or combined with MDM, that becomes more of a like a KPI, or a measurement that we would say, instead of spending 40 hours a week on something, or 30 hours a week on something, now you're able to actually gain insights versus spending the time cleansing the data and making it usable for the organization.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably an unfair question of me to be asking. How do you know that? What's the KPI, or the measurement of governance? It's kind of like, we've invented a new sport. We've written the rule book for it. What's the effectiveness of the rule book? Well, you only really know that when you start playing the game. And I think you just hinted at that, Celeste, that each of the individual teams with each of their individual goals will measure that for themselves against the governance framework. So go ahead. Were you going to say something there, Andrea? I was just about to ask you to speak anyway. So
yeah, I was just going to jump in. I know you had encouraged us to kind of pop in if we had comments on that. I would say in my current company, we are just at the beginning of starting that journey. I will say in my prior company, I was with a CPG firm for 25 years. In the last 5 years, I was leading their global data governance organization. And I would say in that organization, we were more mature, and we were using quality scorecards. So we were tracking our trends on our business quality on what we defined as our critical data elements. So we were doing that they were starting to do it before I even joined that team, 5 years before I left, where they were tracking those trends to say, are we increasing or decreasing on these critical data elements? They were also tracking how many domains were they actually governing? Where did we have stewards assigned? Where did we have data owners defined? Did they have critical business elements defined? Were those the critical business elements that were connected to the business KPIs and the business strategy? And if so, how? Which strategies were they tied to? So that we could go back and talk to those business unit presidents and help them understand what data their key projects was dependent on and which of those data domains were actually governed and which ones weren't. And we were starting to transform out of master data into the operational data sets that were actually the key to those analytical platforms that they were using to drive those business decisions. So I would say there are good ways to measure effective governance, but it takes time to get there because you have to have something to measure, right? It's not, that's the part of data governance, and that's so hard. That's one of the reasons it's so hard to justify a data governance project and platform, because you don't have benchmarks to start from. You don't know how bad your data is or how good it is. So therefore, you can't go to people and say, our data is horrible, we have to put data governance in play, because you don't have metrics to know that it's horrible, right? Because you don't have the business rules defined. So that's one of the things I will say is it takes time to get there. But once you have things established, you do have ways to tell the story as to how you are progressing and if you are improving and having impact on the key business focuses.
So if it's difficult to measure and benchmark the value of governance before you start, it feels a little bit like a leap of faith to get started. Would you agree with that? And given your experience, you can at least in your current organization explain to them what the promised land, what the future will look like. How do you go about doing that specifically, Andrea?
I was actually fortunate in the sense that when I joined the company, they were in the midst of a couple key IT deliverables that were data dependent, and they were already hearing the squeaky wheels saying, we don't know where to get this data from. And it was more so about the fact that it was coming from multiple ERPs, and they weren't sure how to bring it all together, and they weren't sure how to map it and how to harmonize and standardize that in order to drive that data consistency. So my role was net new, and it was based off of a recognized need to understand how to unify all that data in order to prepare themselves for the future and where they wanted to go. So it was less, I think, about the data quality of concerns of if they had bad data. It was more about how do we bring all this data together in order to enable us to move forward as a unified platform. So then based on that, then I could start to tell the story about, let's think about what good data looks like in addition to how we bring that all together, and then start to give that with some examples.
Excellent. Yeah. And that kind of harks back to, I think, something you said in the video that we played earlier, where you talked about you took some examples of the data and showed people what it looked like when it was matched and not matched. And they were a little bit perhaps surprised or shocked that it was as poor as it was. So I guess you start to show them the value of governance just with a few data examples and show them what it could be like if they did a better job of managing all the data under their control.
And it may not have actually been poor, but it might have just been inconsistent. So what's the right answer, right? And how do we do it consistently across the company? And I'll just highlight that, because it doesn't necessarily mean it was wrong data or bad data, but it was inconsistent data, which was leading to opportunities, right?
Yep. Okay, perfect. So the next question, then let's get into a little bit organizationally. How do you make this work? Or what has been your experience as to what works and what doesn't? Because there's probably no one size fits all, but let's talk about it. Where should governance live organizationally? Who should it report up to? Should it be in IT? Should it be in the line of business? Should it be a chief data officer or some kind of separate organization? Dedicated team, part-time matrix positions. There's a lot that goes into all of this. So Celeste, let's have you kick off and talk a little bit about where you think where does it fit for your organization, and what do you think are the pros and cons of that?
Okay. I think my opinion is that I think it varies based upon the type of organization, how it's structured, and the biggest thing is the existing culture. So I believe most organizations are executing governance practices today, and we were executing governance practices, but we just didn't have them formalized. So if you think about, compliance and regulations, like all of those things were in place, and the communications were going out, and everybody understood, the importance of classifying data. Um, However, I think it's always best to have a central team to establish a framework. Somebody has to start with it and give direction, and to formalize and execute new and existing governance practices, begin the engagement with stakeholders to not only identify, opportunities and issues, but also help organize resolutions. So there's multiple models out there, to identify where governance should live and who owns the responsibility. But you really have to start with a model that works for you. So for us, it began as a centralized model. However, data governance is a program, and data governance is a fast evolving um, practice. So as your program evolves, the model will as well. So while we started out as a centralized model, um, it it really does live across the organization, and I can see where we're potentially starting to see pieces of it where we could shift into um, there's some federated pieces, I think. Like I can see where we're having some shift. So and it'll be interesting to see where we are, 2 to 3 years down the road.
Indeed, indeed. I think it'll be interesting for all of us 2 to 3 years down the road. Sean, how does where does governance live from your perspective? IT based, line of business based. Again, your world's possibly a little bit different, but I'm interested to hear how you handle it.
Yeah, so right or wrong, our governance has always been kind of centered in the, I guess I would call it the IM IT, IM more than IT here at the ministry, but we work closely with the health authorities in the province, and we have, I guess I would call it maybe a bit of a federated approach, with us having more of a final decision factor. And that seems to work reasonably well. We've had some committees over the years. Now, again, when it comes to these contractual data sets we have to send up, those are very formalized. Those are well machinated, but that's because we've got this contract that we end up. It kind of dictates how those operate. The rest of my governance world, we're just kind of starting to stand it up now. We're starting to play in the space around health facilities and service delivery. So very rapidly, one of the health authorities has stood up a registry of health services, because there were some media stories of someone goes to the ED or ER that they think is open according to the website. Turns out it's actually not open. That's obviously not a good news story.
No.
So now they're working on standing up an application that is actually going to be fed live, and there's accountability pieces that go. They're standing it up, but I think ownership of that concept, that framework around the governance, is going to stay with the ministry. So a little bit of I guess I would call it a hybrid between dedicated and part-time or matrix, and very much a federated approach here.
So joint ownership between the business that's using it and the IT function that's kind of backing it up.
Yeah,
Great.
That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you got to find a way of getting these two things to fit together. Andrea, how does it work in your world? Do you and all of governance report up to which part of the business, and how is that funded, supported? Who are your stakeholders? All of that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Currently, we are reporting up through the finance organization. So we are a business team with I have a dotted line to our CIO as well. So it's a very strong partnership between technology and the business and finance. I'll be candid, I was a very strong advocate for having data governance outside of IT initially, primarily because I think when data falls under a traditional IT shop, it's viewed as an IT problem. And it's really challenging to get the business to lean into owning the data and understanding the role that they have to play of governing that data. And by taking that capability out of IT and either standing it up as a standalone or putting it into a business unit, you're transferring, even if it's just from an appearance perspective, you're transferring the data as an asset into the hands of the business. And it encourages the business to understand that they are ultimately the owners of that data, and they define what is good or what is bad. and ensuring the quality of that. I will say though, once you have that mindset in place, or once you've got the momentum going, or once you have a strong digital leader who's leading a broader organization who has a very strong partnership with the business, I think it can be successful in either of those places. But the key is helping the business understand, your business partners understand their role in owning and driving the quality of that data. And that to me is the biggest deciding factor where the group should go. Where do you have the most chance of success to drive that home? So that was my take on it and where we are today. But as Celeste says, I think it's unique for every business. And it really depends on the maturity of data literacy and how people view their data, and where the passion and the energy is for it, and who can drive it home.
I'm curious. Each one of you has said in different ways that it's a hybrid responsibility between yourselves who are owning the governance and IT and the line of business. How much top-down support do you get? I mean, how much is top-down support important to getting it done? That someone very, very senior says this is incredibly important and we are going to do it. I'm curious about that, and I'm curious about whether. Let's just talk about that. Sean, you're nodding there. What do you think?
Oh, I'm still just agreeing with Andrea about the IT function, because I've met too many IT folks that think IT is the business, and they can't seem to realize that it's an enabler for the business, which is what pays for the IT in the first place. So love that method. I would say for my organization, I don't think the people at the top really know the importance of data governance. There's not a lot of data literacy in my org. So I wouldn't say I've got a lot of top down. What I would say though is it's clear we need to do it because it's going to become an issue. And so their focus is on, well, why can't you answer this question? Or why did I get 3 different answers to the same question? And so that's pointing to the we need to centralize it. We need to have this framework. We need to put governance in place before it becomes an issue. And I start getting maybe not top-down support, but top-down pressure.
Exactly. Yes. So Celeste, I mean, we heard from Brian earlier, and you've spoken to this, that the Hive is kind of a highly matrixed organization that kind of works with others. But I'm curious, I don't think I've ever asked this question of you guys before. How far up in the organization does the mandate for MDM and governance and all of this stuff come? I mean, obviously from Brian, but then are there levels above that have said publicly, here's what we're going to do that have helped you get it done? Or is it all been kind of bottom up, organic, convincing people as you go along?
I think initially we started, I think, more bottom up, but the priority focus in our organization. And so I'm connected directly with our regional and our global product teams who are executing data governance. And so it's a priority focus from the global, the regional, and the market level. But even within, like Brian is an awesome leader. He has these great partnerships with globally, but also just within Purina itself and within the market. So there is a top-down approach, but I would like to say it's more like we're meeting in the middle. But it is a number one initiative inside of our organization at all levels.
So again, a kind of a hybrid, a balanced approach, some bottom up, some top down, and somewhere there's a practical meeting in the middle that gets things to actually happen.
Yes.
Okay. Andrea, you mentioned that you had a long career in a different organization, which was, according to what you said, a higher maturity than the one you're in at the moment. And right now you're working to build the maturity of your current organization. What have you seen in terms of top down versus bottom up for the instigation, the inspiration, if you like, around governance, and what works?
Absolutely. So interestingly enough, both of my experiences were polar opposite. So it's kind of crazy to see and very cool to see at the same time. My current position where I'm at now, it was top down. I had support from the CEO. I reported directly to the CFO. It was fantastic. But what I will tell you is, as much support as I had from them, they could only help me to start the initiative. The people that mattered are the middle managers who control the resources, who are actually doing the work, right? And that get it. So I would say that while I did have very strong C-suite support, that's not what's going to make it successful. What's going to make it successful for me is getting the buy-in of the people that are doing the work in the day-to-day processes, and helping them to understand why this is beneficial to them. On the other side, in my prior world, it was actually a very grassroots effort. We had a fantastic team of people over there, and one or two people in particular who started the concept of cataloging and quality at the grassroots level in our master data team. And they just built it up little by little and started demonstrating the value of it. You document this and you put quality metrics against it. Guess what I can tell you? Guess what I can show you? And that started the ball rolling. And by the time I left after joining that 5 years afterwards, and they started probably 5 years before me, that was an entire focus area. We had data governance managers. We had an entirely dedicated stewardship team that were separated from our operations team. I had a governance strategy team. We were getting involved in all of the top prioritized projects, not only from a master data perspective, but from their own key data set perspective. That was an entirely grassroots effort. And I would give all of the accountability for the success of that to those two people that started that 10 or so years ago with a couple spreadsheets. So I've seen it come from both directions and be successful. But I really think it's getting the people in the day-to-day work onboarded with this and thinking about it regularly that drives this home and keeps it moving forward.
Fantastic. All right, some great insights there. Thank you for all of that conversation. Let's flip from the organizational side to technical. What do you guys each have in terms of the software, whatever infrastructure you have to help with both MDM and governance, and how do they intersect? I imagine that it's going to, I think each one of you has a very different answer to this, and I'm sure it's evolving. So can you give us just a little bit of insight into how all of that is going? Who wants to go first?
Mine will be the shortest answer.
Okay.
I'll start. We've got Prophecy as our MDM that we're just starting to launch, which has been great. And then we just purchased a data catalog that we're going to start implementing on top of that. And that's as far as we are right now in my current organization from a technical perspective. So
the data catalog does how much governance does it do, or is it just literally a catalog of here's what we got?
We just signed the papers on it last week, Martin. So we are going to start implementing it soon, and that I'll update you next year when you invite me back.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's going to be a voyage. We'll check back in with you. Okay, Sean, I think you're about to speak there. How does this all look from your perspective?
So we've had many kicks to the can over the years. We've used a SharePoint table. Our current iteration, I think, is an online spreadsheet called Smartsheets, which has the data catalog. That's basically just Excel, but cloud hosted. And just in the past couple months, we're in the finishing stages of standing up a data analytics platform in Azure. So we're using Purview for the data catalog, data lineage, and all of that stuff. And we have Prophecy as our MDM solution, which went live 4 weeks ago. And we just have our first cohort of users getting in there now, starting to use the crosswalk table after the linking. So do you need technology? No, not really. But I can tell you it's been a real pain in the butt not having some kind of a technology, because the catalog's just never kept up to date. It's very limited in what it can do when it's Excel or Smartsheets or SharePoint. So really excited about where we're headed here. And again, if you invite me back next year, I'm hoping to be able to give you a lot more information about what we've done.
Fantastic. It's interesting. Both of you have pointed out something that I think is, when you take a step back, is maybe self-evident. I mean, Prophecy has been selling MDM as a solution for a long time, long before we had integration with Purview or any of those other platforms. There's a certain amount of governance to just thinking about what is it I want, what is the output I want of my data, what should it look like when it's good. You kind of got to think through that at some level before you can even implement MDM. But you don't necessarily need a catalog or some third-party system to do that. My experience is that it helps to scale things up, but it's not something that should necessarily hold you back. Celeste, I mean, what's your journey been look like in terms of all the tools and technology that supports the work that you guys do?
So Azure is our platform, and we have Prophecy as our MDM solution. We're also using Experian as our address cleansing, and then we use Purview as our data catalog. We are in our MVP stage with that, and then we are also. I mentioned earlier that we have dedicated teams at the regional and the global level with a data governance initiative. And we are beginning our journey of discovering a data quality tool to adopt into
Okay,
our.
that's interesting, and that kind of segues perfectly to a follow-up question that came in the chat earlier for you, Celeste. What preventative measures do you have for address data quality at the entry points? You mentioned Experian, and you mentioned some other things you're doing. How do you deal with preventing bad data getting into the system in the first place?
So there's a couple things here. We interview. I like to say we interview our data sets that we're allowing to come into our organization. So we didn't begin with a data catalog. We have something known as a data set registry internally, where we really want to understand that data and to ensure that we are getting, it's not necessarily, it's like making sure that we're getting data from a good source. As far as preventing bad data, we have common code libraries that look for duplicates, and some of those things that we're doing today are grassroots, but they are common code that our developers can leverage to monitor volume and changes in volume, and to remove duplicates, and or if there's schema drift, things like that would prevent things from coming in. And that's why we're hoping that with a data quality tool that we could move that common code library and even increase functionality, where we're getting automated profiling potentially out of a data quality tool to kind of tell us a little bit more about the data and the health of the data as it enters on on its regular frequency.
Excellent. There was one other question that came in for you specifically, Celeste. How many people in the Hive Swarm spokes at Nestle? Just give some idea of the scope organizationally of the team that you guys are working with.
I'm going to say 75 to 80.
That's
people.
A substantial investment.
Hey, Martin, if I can jump in just for a minute.
Sure.
I was being a little bit facetious before when I was mentioning that, we're on the start with MDM and with the catalog, right? I will say, to give credit where credit is due, we do a lot of active checking as the data is created in our various ERP systems, right? So there's a lot of data governance, quality perspective, per se, that's inherent in a lot of our systems as the data is being collected on a regular basis as well. So that it's just built into when those tools are originally configured, and then flows through, right? So I don't want to ever give the impression that there isn't data validation happening throughout the entry of the systems, et cetera. But when asked about specific governance capabilities, that's where I would say we're quite limited on what we have right now as far as what we're rolling out. The other thing I'll just throw out for awareness is we are also an Azure company, our platform, and then we're actually using Melissa data for our address verification and email verifications. So we are doing that as well in partnership with the Prophecy capability to ensure that we've got valid data for our suppliers.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a tremendous conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I think our audience has too. Let's wrap up with just whatever final thoughts you guys have, whatever is top of mind that you think the anyone in the audience here might be interested in terms of just your insights into governance, how to get started, how to sell it to the organization. Just anything that you think would be an interesting recap for the audience. Sean, you're nodding there, so I'm going to start with you.
So it's interesting. Governance isn't front and center in what I've been doing lately, but it's been kind of the backbone of it. We're trying to sell this analytics cloud platform to be permanently funded, and what we've done is we've really taken it up several levels. What are the things we can answer for our health system by having a high quality, highly linkable data set that we can then share broadly? And so we're asking stuff like, how many people with diabetes live in this region of the province, got this medication, and had to go to the ER within the last couple of months? I could answer that today, but it's going to take about 3 to 6 months to piece everything together, identify all those people, learn how to work with that data. By having this platform with that governance as that backbone, that could be done in a few days or less. But in order to get there, we have to have that governance backbone. So we're selling the value of what you get out of it rather than governance itself.
That sounds perfect to me. Yes, it's all about what you can do with it. It's about the business outcome. So fantastic. Andrea and Celeste, what do you think?
I'll go ahead and go.
Yeah.
So to me, having an executive sponsor is a driving force who really understands and can communicate how it adds value. To me, helps to sell to management and to others and to stakeholders. Just some quick advice, I would say. Like, do find your sponsor. Tap into your culture. Start small and be willing to pivot, because these frameworks, the culture, and organizational needs are going to evolve. As far as, like, don't delay and don't treat it as a project, it's a program, and don't overlook involving stakeholders at the beginning. And that's just some quick advice.
Perfect. Andrea, last word to you.
Sure. I would say my biggest learning, and I think something for all data professionals to remember, is most of the world doesn't speak our language. So we have to figure out how to speak theirs. And I struggle with that every day, right? I can rattle off data terms left and right and all of this. And my business users, especially at my current company where this is a new concept, their faces go, completely blank on me. So biggest piece of advice is figure out how to speak your business's language, and figure out how to tell the stories about your data from a business perspective, and help them by talking about their business issues and breaking it down to the data that's important for their business issues, but talk about it in business terms. They don't even need to know it's data per se, right? You're helping them do their jobs and drive their visions by prioritizing and cleansing the information they need, right? And making sure it's good. So that's probably my biggest piece of advice. And I will candidly say the hardest piece of advice for me to take on my own world is to speak to them in their language so that they understand what you're trying to achieve and what value you're trying to bring for them.
Perfect. All right. I think that's a great place for us to stop. And by the way, all of the rest of the panel laughed when you said that. So it's clearly resonated there, Andrea. So thank you, all three, Andrea, Celeste, and Sean, for participating here. Thank you for your candor. Someone mentioned in the chat, there's, I think you've been tremendously open, and I think that is very helpful for everybody. So we're going to call a halt here. I think there's going to be about a 2-minute break while you can all go refresh your coffee cups before the next session starts. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.